Welcome to another edition of the Mael Time Podcast. I'm joined today by John Polin. How do you introduce yourself these days?
That's a good question. I am best known in this period of time as father of Hirsh. But I'm also Rachel's husband. I'm also the father of Libby and Orly and various other identities. But I assume today we're mostly going to talk about what it is to be the father of Hirsh in this period of time.
I want to go back to October 7th. And again, full disclosure, we have a very long, extended family connection here. Those first few days and the chaos that was involved in Israel, did you have a sense of how famous and involved everything would become? Because again, when you went to Shul as the Gabbai on the morning of October 7th, people in Israel might have known you, but not, your wife wasn't meeting with the Pope.
No, that's the thing about this is on the so many levels of complexity in the situation that we're all in, the one that has been the case from the beginning and is still the case is nobody knows when and how this ends. So October 7th, we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know where Hirsh was. We didn't know what condition he was in. We didn't know any of that. But even if I fast forward to once we found out that he was taken captive with an arm missing and we had the puzzle pieces starting to come together, we would say then, we don't know if we succeed and get him out in 3 hours, if as we continued to count the days on our shirts, Rachel started this on day 26, I recall a journalist saying, well, are you prepared for when this potentially gets to be 4 digits? And we were like, 4 digits? Are you kidding? Of course that's not going to happen. But we just don't know. And we still don't know. On day 562, do we bring home 59 people alive and dead today and put some sort of closure on this chapter? Or are we still in for some long haul? We just don't know. And so, of course, on October 7th, we had no idea how long it was going to take. We had no idea that we'd be going on this journey of the twists and turns of the travels that we've been on and the people we've met. And we just had no idea. And it's the case minute to minute. We'd wake up in the morning having some idea of what we wanted to do that day. 20 minutes later, something might have happened that completely changed our priorities for that day.
When did you have a sense that it wasn't going to be 3 hours?
So there were some people from within the system in Israel who we sat with relatively early on in the first couple of weeks, who of course didn't know anything, but several of them said to us, buckle up. Like we don't know how long this is going to take. I think there have been numerous steps throughout the process that solidify that, right? The first deal in late November, primarily women and children. Even once that deal broke and we were back at war, we didn't know if that was going to be a flare-up for 3 days and we'd go back to the bargaining table and continue. So we kept getting a sense that this thing is going to be longer than any of us wants it to be. But I still can't say that I have any ideas of almost what's happened to us, and certainly not where we, the Israeli people, the families of hostages, the families of soldiers, where this is all headed.
When you talk about that first deal, do you know why Hirsh wasn't included in the first few days? Obviously, when he had his arm blown off, that would qualify him to be in a very dangerous situation. And there were other men, young adults that were included. Do you know why definitively he was not?
Yeah, so the young men who were included, if I'm not mistaken, were all before their mandatory military service. And then it was children and women. That was the structure of the deal. I know that at some point during that first deal, Hamas started to, for lack of a better word, kind of play with the Israeli side by threatening to stop releasing women and instead release wounded men, young men, and Israel, excuse me, and Israel needed to, at some point, kind of decide how they were going to respond to that. I don't know if Hirsh might have gotten out, might have been offered to come out. I have a suspicion that he was on a list in that first deal to potentially come out. I must say that I have some understanding for the Israeli side, which was if we allow the rules of the deal as structured, which is get all the women and children out first, if we allow those rules to be broken, it's setting a bad precedent from here forward. And so Israel, I think, may have had to make a decision that as soon as the deal was, we're going to try to give, Hamas, are going to try to give you people who are not in the framework of the deal, Israel decided no. I can say that I see the logic in that, but these are just some of the unknowns that I hope one day we'll have clarity on, just for our own sake. But
I noticed you talk as the Israeli people, and you made Aliyah here, I believe, in 2008.
Summer of 2008. That's right.
All of a sudden, you're thrust into a situation where your American passport and your American background plays almost a more significant role than the fact that you are Israeli. Can you talk a little bit about that juxtaposition and how you become essentially the face of the American-Israeli part of the hostage delegation?
So in the end, I don't know that the American citizenship did play a more substantial role, but I can tell you that like every one of the original 250 plus hostage families, every family looked for any angle that they could work with to get all the help they can get. So anybody who had more than one passport was pretty quickly turning to those other countries and seeking their help, just like we did with the United States of America. By the way, I'm not sure that all your listeners know the magnitude of how this was a hit on America as well, meaning on October 7th, 45 Americans were killed. I believe 12 or 13 were taken on the 7th hostage. Still 5 remain, as you and I are talking. 1 believed to be alive, 4 believed to no longer be alive. So we very quickly turned to the United States. We figured on October 7th, Israel is, of course, going to do everything they can, given this catastrophe, to do everything possible to bring home all the hostages. So we quickly turned to the United States and spoke to the embassy, and the ball kind of rolled from there. It was on October 9th or 10th that we were invited to a press conference with a few other families of American Israelis. That small group pretty quickly turned into the group of American Israelis who banded together as one of the many concentric circles I always talk about. There was the circle of 251 hostages. There was the circle of American Israeli hostages. There was the circle of the young male hostages. There were all these interwoven circles. The American piece of it certainly took us to the U.S. many times, took us to meetings with the Biden administration many times, numerous members of Congress and others in the United States. But it was about using every possible angle we could use to do everything possible to save Hirsh and all the hostages, just like every other family did for their loved one.
And obviously, hindsight's 2020. Looking back, how do you evaluate the advice and the input you were getting from the Biden administration when it came to the negotiations? Was it, vis-a-vis Qatar, Egypt? It's hard because obviously it's an international incident. There's so many different governments at play, and you're not really sure who's your friend, I'm going to imagine, right? So whether it's Egypt, Qatar, and other places. So
what I've said about the Biden administration, who was the administration throughout our journey, is A, for effort. And I don't mean that to be condescending. I really mean it. Like that first Friday, October 13th, American Israeli families did a Zoom with President Biden. And it's now sort of famous, but It was long. His aides tried to get him off, and he said, I'm not getting off. This is too important. And he got emotional, and he cried with the families, and he shared his own stories of loss and his determination to not have us go through that. And he meant it. And he and his team were available to us. They met us consistently. They updated us. But I also say, at the end of the day, we were not in this to make new friends, to make friends with important, influential politicians. We were in this to save our loved one. And we, all of us, we failed in that. Hirsh was killed, and that shouldn't have happened. But I'll say that I think that perhaps the U.S. administration and certainly the world, I think, first of all, they let us down. Too many hostages have been killed. There are still hostages sitting there after 562 days. And I'm disappointed that the world leadership has not been able to solve this. You know, it's easy now to be critical of Israel in terms of its response. Was it proportional and fair? And I think that's okay to have that conversation. But I sometimes think that what gets lost in this whole conversation is it was a clear, blue-skied, peaceful day on October 7th when Hamas came in, broke what had been a long-standing quote-unquote ceasefire, and wreaked the havoc that they did on that quiet morning. And the world seems to have not only not stood arm in arm and said, this is not okay, we need these innocent people to be released, but it wasn't long after October 7th that it felt like the world was already ganging up on Israel. And I just think that we've lost all sense of proportion, context, and the reminder of what things were like here on October 7th before 6:29 a.m.
Did you catch what Vladimir Putin said to Sasha Trubinov and Sapir Cohen?
I did.
What was your thoughts on it? And for those who are not familiar, he, among other things, suggested that they be thankful to Hamas for compromising, or at least the political arm for compromising, and refused to actually outright label Hamas as a terrorist organization.
So it's easy now, given where the world is politically, to jump in and say, we've lost all sense of right and wrong, right? That's trite. But there is something to this. Again, you want to be critical of Israel? Go for it. I've lived here for 17 years, and I'm critical, oftentimes, of Israel. I think that's fair. But let's never, not only forget what happened on October 7th, but let's never try to make the equivalent comparison of, well, they did this, so we did this. No. No country in the world can accept marauders coming in masse, as happens to Israel on October 7th, all the things that we know about, the killing and the pillaging and the raping and the taking hostages. And it just feels like here we are 562 days later, and there's an imbalanced conversation happening here.
And it's also so unfair to them when I see Sasha and Sapir's face, and I'm sitting there saying, in their minds, if they make the wrong move, if they say the wrong thing, they could endanger the people that are still left behind. And you're sitting there with the architect and the mastermind of this massively horrible war between Russia and Ukraine. And just to see that, it was really difficult. But as you talked about, you're not there to make friends, and it's so hard to know because a lot of these leaders are not, you and I wouldn't necessarily want to get a beer with them.
You know, I'll just say this. There are conflicts happening all over the world. Some of them get talked about, some of them don't. Some of them get talked about with some amount of balance, some of them don't. We're not going to tackle all of the geopolitical and the media coverage right now. I just think that it is okay to call out disastrous, murderous, immoral behavior when it happens. The world should do that. And I haven't seen enough of that.
When you talk about, you said we failed, and you're talking about the people that were trying to rescue Hirsh and rescue the other hostages. Have you had conversations with the Army regarding leading up to October 7th and October 7th itself? I've heard you talk about your appreciation that Dan Goldfuss took responsibility in the meeting with the Nova families. Have you had any further discussions with people that have provided any sort of comfort?
So there have been various investigations that were reported to the families. So I was present in a small group when the 6 families whose loved ones were killed together in a tunnel in late August were presented with the investigation of what happened. In fact, I did it in 2 small groups of 3 families in each. So it was very intimate, and it was long, nearly 3 hours. On the one hand, I appreciate that they showed some level of seriousness. And by they, I mean the Israeli army. It was senior people from the military who presented that investigation. On the other hand, and we told them this in the room, much of it was not relevant for the questions that we all have. In the case of the 6 whose loved ones were killed together in a tunnel in late August, nothing's going to bring them back. But we have a curiosity of why, what led captors to turn and execute captives when we had been told for 330 days, that's not going to happen. They're too much of an asset. Something must have happened to trigger them to do that. What is it? And we don't have an answer to that question. What we were presented is lots of details of, maneuvers and what led up to the period of time in late August when they ultimately were executed. But we have unanswered questions, and it's not just about what were the military maneuvers that may have triggered something, but what were the political decisions, what were the decisions made since October 7th regarding hostages and hostage negotiations. And again, I say all this not through a lens of anything is going to bring back our loved ones, not through a lens of we want justice. It's curiosity. There's natural curiosity that families have when their loved ones get tragically murdered in crazy circumstances. And we just want as much information as possible to help fill in the holes of why and how that happened. It's part of why, among the other things that we are advocating for, is a national commission of inquiry, a Vadat Chakira Mamlachtit in Israel. It just seems like it is the right thing for the country to do. It's why 85% of the population supports it. From my perspective, it's not about pointing fingers and blaming. It's about learning from our mistakes, as anybody should do when they make disastrous mistakes, to ensure that they minimize the chance that anything like it ever happens again.
I want to get to that in 1 second, but talking about that day, speaking to other families, I know they found out from WhatsApp and Telegram. And before we sat down, I listened to many interviews you gave, and there was something in which you alluded to the fact that you told Rachel to expect something, and then you said Tehillim, and Rachel opened the door. So I'm going to guess that you found out from someone who saw something on WhatsApp or Telegram.
It's true. I've talked before about how every moment for 330 days from the time that the disaster happened on the morning of October 7th until we were informed of Hirsch's murder, it was 330 days. Every moment of those 330 days was torturous. I would say that probably the most painful 7 hours of those 330 days was from 9 p.m. on Saturday night until 4 a.m. on Sunday morning. And what happened in those 7 hours is at 9 p.m., I got a message from a friend, really a friend of Hirsch's, now a friend of mine, who was at the local soccer game. And he said, the rumors are all over the stadium. I'm worried about Libby, my daughter, Hirsch's sister, who was at the game. And we are all trying to figure out how to protect her as much as possible. To which I said, what rumors? I don't know what you're talking about. And he's the one who told me that there were rumors swirling on Telegram that they found 6 dead hostage bodies, one of them being Hirsh. That then triggered me to go call our army point of contact, various other contacts here in Israel, and begin the process of trying to figure out what was going on. At that point, the rumors got out to all of the media that they had found 6 bodies. Names were already being mentioned. And I was in pretty regular touch with various folks from the military, from the intelligence world here in Israel. And so we were saying Tehillim, and when I got that call at 4 o'clock in the morning from our army representative that she and a team of people were downstairs in our building, we didn't even need them to come up. And yes, as you alluded to, people in Israel understand the infamous knock on the door. It's that knock on the door that no family in Israel wants to get from the military. And so when we got the call from downstairs, knowing what it was going to be, Rachel cut it off at the pass. And before we'd ever get the knock on the door, she went and had our door open so that we would not have to hear that terrible knock.
I turned my phone on Motzei Shabbat in Miami, and Or, Carmel Gott's brother, had sent me a message because he knew I was pretty plugged in from our work with soldiers, saying in Hebrew if I'd heard something. And I said, I will check. And I'll never forget him then calling me saying that the army had just shown up. But my heart, not only broken, but I was so upset that that's how the information was released. And I know that Hagari had said that they were going to investigate it and report back to try to prevent this from happening again in the future. Have you heard anything about that investigation or any promises beyond that?
No, I've also heard that there was going to be an investigation. We were actually told subsequently a few months later that there was an investigation and they were unable to find how it leaked, where that came from. Their explanation was there are so many hands, even behind the scenes, involved in these military maneuvers, so that it may have been somebody on the ground in Gaza who was in or outside of that tunnel. It may have been some source in intelligence sitting in an office in Israel somewhere. We just don't know. And while I do have curiosity to understand it, there are so many bigger things that I'm thinking about and focused on right now. But that did lead our family, and I know the 5 other families, to a lot of pain for those 7 hours of rumors.
You mentioned there's bigger things on your mind, and you guys have been unbelievable advocates for all of the hostages, even after Hirsh, unfortunately, did not have the result that we all prayed for and wanted. As we discussed before offline, everything's been done very publicly. The Shiva was a Shiva for Hirsh, but everyone showing up, they were there to console you, but also to console themselves. Can you talk a little bit about what that's been like, every move and every action being extremely public, and essentially when you post something on Facebook, it's national news?
Yeah, so I'll talk about that through a personal lens, but first I want to zoom out and say that what you're talking about, what you're asking about, it's true on a national level, which is to say, ask any hostage family, ask any family of a fallen soldier, and I think what you will hear consistently is we can't begin our personal process of healing, of rehabilitation, while this is all still going on. And when I say this, I mean we still have 59 hostages. We still have soldiers on the battlefield. We still have all these unknowns. It's hard for any of us to begin the healing process, to really go through it appropriately when we still all have so much work to do. And in some ways, the work that we all collectively need to do is only getting magnified over time, right? Unfortunately, we're seeing divisions among the people of Israel. What path we should take, what's the right way, what's the right priority. And it just feels like as time passes, in some ways, the concept of healing is getting more and more challenging. So I'll kind of say that on a national level. On a personal level, while that's all completely true, it's also true that we were thrust, Rachel and I and our family, into circumstances that nobody should ever be thrust into. And we went from living a anonymous, private life to what you described, where people got to know us. In some ways, it was helpful. We felt pretty quickly from October 7th. Like, we were starting to build a global army of supporters, of advocates, literally all over the world, who were amazing. I mean, we were part of a team of thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, all out there advocating for Hirsh and all the hostages. And that gave us a ton of strength. It gave us the ability to keep pushing forward every single day throughout the struggle. And we're still part of it. We took some time off for Shiva. We took some time off for Shloshim, the 30-day period after the burial. But especially as a family who's gone through this, had the worst possible outcome, knows what that feels like, and knows how much we don't want any other family to end up the way our situation ended. We can't sit and not be part of this. And I also want to add that I've told the story that among the 251 hostages, while 99% of them were taken on October 7th, mostly from their beds and music festival, over the course of time, 4 hostages who were already in Gaza before October 7th became part of the struggle, and their families became part of the struggle. And one of them was Avira Mengistu, who walked into Gaza on his own on September 7th, 2014. And what I say is, for the subsequent few years, 2014, 15, 16, 17, of course, many people in Israel knew the name Avira Mengistu. They were advocating, but it wasn't a movement. And that really bothered Hirsh. Hirsh was talking regularly about Avira Mengistu and why were we, all Israelis, not out advocating in force for him. And you'd sometimes see 3 or 4 people standing on a street corner in Jerusalem holding signs for Avira. One of them was Hirsh. And we now say, before he was a hostage, Hirsh was a hostage advocate. And I say that because, first of all, when Avira came home, Rachel and I had a little extra celebration because of what it would have meant to Hirsh. But also because, in many ways, what's fueling us to keep going is, it's what Hirsh would do. And so we keep going.
Do you have an answer as to why it wasn't a bigger issue before? And the fact that Hadar Golden's family would have the weekly meetings and weekly protests, and people were kind of going on with life as normal. And how did you answer Hirsh back then, and how do you answer that today?
I think really it's a numbers game. And I don't know what that number is that motivates people to go out. But unfortunately for the Shaul family and the Goldens and others who have been fighting for years to bring their loved ones out of captivity, the game, and I hate to even call it that, but the game changes when it's 1 or 2 or 4 families versus 250. Not to mention that the 250 are on the heels of the single most deadly day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and all the things that your listeners now all know that fueled people to be engaged here. I always felt terrible for the Arad family, for the Golden family, for the Shaul family. I would advocate a little bit. I would talk a little bit. But clearly I realize now it wasn't enough. And, it would be great if all of us would band together every single time we had a brother or a sister in need. It's something we should all strive for.
I think we definitely have to keep that feeling together. It shouldn't take immense loss and national tragedy for that to happen. Looking back, I think that the way in which things are dealt with was wrong, and God willing, we can learn from this, and hopefully it will prevent the next thing from happening if we're...
And again, I worry about everything getting politicized. We, and again, I'm talking about the global we. But I
want to ask you this. You managed to not be political at all. Your family towed that line so successfully. And this is not to criticize Einav, although I have criticism for some of those things, or someone who's in the Tikva forum. But how did you manage to stay so apolitical?
Look, we always say every person, every family has to take on this struggle in the way that's most comfortable for them. And I've seen the whole gamut. I see people out in the streets screaming. No problem. If that's what works for them, that's what they should do. I know families who sat quietly for hundreds of days because they wanted to keep a low profile, because they were too distraught to be out doing anything. No problem. That's what works for them. Every family, every person has to choose their path. In our case, staying quote unquote apolitical was really just about, number one, it shouldn't be political. The taking of hostages should never be politicized. It's something that we all in the world should work on. Now that we've been the unfortunate, tragic victims of this, I don't know that I'm going to take on global hostage taking as a cause, but I have a level of motivation to do that because in 2025, the world should not accept the taking of innocent people as hostages. It should not be acceptable. The United Nations, the global diplomatic community, all of us as global citizens should not ever be okay with that. So some of our staying apolitical is because it should be, I think, apolitical. And some of it was about, we want help from wherever it could come from. We don't care who gets the credit for saving the lives of hostages. We just want them saved. If it's a right-winger in Israel or a left-winger, a Democrat or a Republican, it doesn't matter. We all want our loved ones coming home. And that led us to take the path that we took and continue to try to take.
Some of your writings on Facebook, and I know you've said that this is not a political statement, but they've had hints of political undertones. Has your perspective changed at all in the last month or two, just in terms of how things have been dealt with in Israel? Because it was very curious for me at the beginning. You didn't seem particularly angry that you had more response from America than you did Israel, just because everything was so crazy in the first few weeks. But your writing in the last month or two has definitely changed a bit. Have you fundamentally changed your thinking?
I think we've all learned over time, right? So there are a few things that we've learned. Number one, if we look at the 180 people, or whatever the number is, who have come out from captivity, there's a very minuscule number who were rescued by military operation, and there is a substantial number that have come out through negotiated settlements. I understand that the government of Israel's position is not necessarily that military pressure is going to rescue the hostages, but it's going to create the conditions in which we could get them out. I think that might be debatable. And so while I don't want to get into those political details here and now, to the extent that I am perhaps speaking out on my private channels a little bit more recently, it's really based on the passage of time and what we should all be learning from that passage of time. The second thing that's maybe motivated me to speak up just a little bit more than I had before is, like I said, I'm distraught that everything is being politicized. The hostages, the judicial system, all of our institutions. And I'll try to be fair here and say that there are people on all sides of the political spectrum who are now guilty of this. We need to stop. We don't need to all agree. We never will. We never should. We Jews have always found disagreement, and the best thing we could do is argue it out in a healthy way. That's fine. But we cannot let our disagreements tear us apart. We cannot let our disagreements put these 59 remaining hostages in the crosshairs of our disagreements. We've got to be better than that. And to the extent that I as one person, that Rachel and I as one family, that the 6 families whose loved ones were killed together, all again of these different concentric circles, to the extent that any of us can use our voice to try to bring some level of unity, togetherness, that's what we need to do.
Do you distinguish at all amongst the 59 hostages between the living hostages and those who have died, from the sense that in order to get them out in a negotiated settlement, there are serious security concerns, freeing of murderers, freeing of terrorists, attempted murderers. Do you distinguish at all in terms of what Israel should do to get everyone out, if they're alive or if they're no longer alive?
So I will say, I, in my head, prioritize the living hostages. We need to get them out because every moment that they're there, there is the risk that they won't stay alive. But while I prioritize that, it doesn't diminish the importance that I place on bringing home the hostages who are no longer living. It's really messed up that Rachel and I feel privileged that within our tragedy, at least we got the closure of burying Hirsh. I went into the Chevra Kadisha van at the cemetery on David's funeral. They peeled back the sheet from part of his face, and I got to see him. That closure, and now having a grave to go to, which we do often, there's so much value in that every single family, including of those who are no longer alive, deserves, and we must all be fighting for. I've commented also that it's a point of pride. The fact that senior members of both the Biden administration and the Trump administration at different points have said to groups of the hostages how much they, the U.S. administrations, have learned from us by the fact that we are fighting as hard as we are, not only for living hostages, but for no longer living hostages, teaches them something about the value that we are placing on these people. Is something that I'm proud of. So, you know, while I say we must bring them all home, I speak a little bit out of both sides of my mouth in terms of how to prioritize.
Well, the reason I ask is because one thing I try to do on the podcast is ask some of the more difficult questions and some of the things that people might talk about on the sidelines, but not necessarily on TV or something. And we're not dealing with Switzerland, right, in Gaza or in Lebanon and in Judea and Samaria. And there are obviously real serious security concerns that can't be ignored as they were before. And I also feel that sometimes in Israel, as I've observed since October 7th, the conversation just becomes a lot of like screaming and very emotional. So I'm just trying to I want the listeners to understand your thinking on that, because I think it's a...
So let me address the security question that I think you're asking. Any negotiated settlement we now know is going to include Israel having to release terrorists, many of them with blood on their hands. We also know that there's a chance that some of those terrorists are going to commit more terror in the future, like Yahya Sinwar did after he was released in the Gilad Shalit deal, and then he was the mastermind of October 7th. I don't for one moment diminish that security risk to the state of Israel. I am an Israeli. I am subject to that risk. That being said, we must assume that risk in order to bring home hostages. It is our responsibility to bring them home, and it is our responsibility to assume the military, intelligence, political pathways to, within paying that price of released terrorists, doing what we can to ensure that the risk that those terrorists commit terror again is diminished. It cannot, it should not, it makes no sense to put all of that on the backs of current hostages. That Matan Zengelker was taken from his home on kibbutz on the morning of October 7th does not now mean that, poor Matan, he's going to be stuck there because we as a country are not strong enough and confident enough that we can assume the risk of having to defend ourselves from released terrorists. It's a terrible price to pay, but it is one that we must pay, and I have thought that all along. That's why 2 days into this, Rachel and I were already saying, we know the price to pay to release, to get back our hostages might be a quote unquote high price. We must pay it as a society. It is not fair to put this on the backs of the hostages, especially given the circumstances of being pulled from beds, from music festivals,
Right.
etc.
Was it?
And I want to say even more, Daniel. It's not just let's pay that price. Let's be proud of the fact that we pay that price. Let's be confident. Let's let it be a sign of strength. We're not perfect. We saw a huge failure on October 7th of our political, military, intelligence echelons, all of them. That can always happen, but we are big, we are strong, we are confident, and we need to get back to that thinking. We need to be dealing from a position of strength, and part of dealing from that position of strength is we will release terrorists because we want to bring our people home and because we will then take on the responsibility of minimizing the risk of future terror. It's what we need to do.
Have you sat down with the Prime Minister to express this perspective to him?
I think the Prime Minister knows that we and so many other families share this. I think the Prime Minister will argue that his responsibility is to 9 million citizens of Israel, not just a select number of hostage families. I understand that responsibility. Again, I'm part of the 9 million. I just think that for our essence, for who we are as Jewish people, for who we are as a sovereign state of Israel, for who we are as a confident people who have done amazing things for 76, almost 77 years and are continuing to do so, we need to know that we have done every single possible thing to bring these people home, including the quote-unquote paying of prices. And it's a message that I wish that our political leaders would understand. I know that I'm not alone in saying this, right? We could dissect polls, but the most recent polling data shows that even when given the quote-unquote price of releasing terrorists, over 70% of the Israeli people say this is what we need to do. We are together on this point.
I'll take it away from just the Prime Minister, but have you sat with the people that disagree with you in the political echelon in Israel and had them look you in the eye and had this kind of conversation? Or is that something that either they don't want to partake in or you don't want to partake in?
I've had it with dozens and dozens of them. And the conversations are generally cordial. But again, the results here are binary. On the hostage issue, which is a piece of a larger issue, I understand. But on the hostage issue, we either bring them home or we don't. And within bringing them home, what I mean is as many as possible alive. In the case of Hirsh and the 5 with whom he was murdered, it's a fail. I don't think anybody could argue that. They got killed. They got executed. That is a fail. People can argue about, well, why, and justify it, but it's a fail. We're dealing in binaries here. We succeed in bringing home hostages alive, or we fail. That's the scorecard. And right now, we've brought home many, and I am proud of that, and I give credit to all those involved in bringing them home. But we've failed for a bunch, 41 who were taken alive and killed, and we risk failing others if we don't act now to bring them all home.
Hirsh couldn't ask for better parents. I know you said that it was a fail, but what you and your entire family did to do everything you possibly could is truly admirable. And I just needed to say that in the context of you saying it was binary, success or failure, and that what you guys did to try to anything, every stone, there wasn't a stone that you didn't turn over. So, and I just wanted to say that because
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Because he couldn't have been blessed with better parents. You guys really, you spoke from the heart. You spoke probably too much in the sense that you weren't even able, you couldn't sleep. You were going all over the world. You could not have asked for you guys to do anything more.
Well, I appreciate that. And we did. We went everywhere. We talked to everyone. there is a specific piece that I a little bit beat myself up over, and I continue to do that as long as we still have hostages. We got to everybody in the world. We got all the right meetings with all the right people. We conveyed the right messages. The very specific thing that I think we failed on was driving a sense of urgency. We had world leaders obviously understanding the risks to our loved ones, but saying to us, we don't think they're going to get killed. They're too much of an asset. The military is working very methodically and carefully. All these reasons that we're effectively saying, we're working on this. We got it. Don't worry. And what we failed to drive for every single person we spoke to was that sense of urgency. We tried, but we just didn't get there. And we're still not getting there. Every moment that passes where there are still hostages, especially hostages who are living right now, and we're not bringing them home, the failure is not getting the message out, not making noise, not getting to the right people. It's not driving a sense of urgency. That's what we need to continue to hammer away at.
Do you think that the playing of the videos that Hamas puts out is helpful for the cause from the Israeli side? Or do you think it's best that the collective, whether it's the hostage forum or television networks, don't publicize those videos?
So I guess it depends how you define helpful. In general, I think that it is important that those videos be played for the broadest possible public, because the risk after 562 days is exhaustion, moving on, and we cannot allow that. So when I see Elchanan Bukbut talking to his wife and his daughter, or when I see Idan Alexander talking to his parents and to all of us, that slaps us all in the face with, holy cow, these are real people, still there, still suffering. It needs to fuel us to keep on going. That's the most important thing. That's why I favor playing the videos. All these other conversations about, it shows weakness, or it has the chance to create some kind of, fissure in society. I just think that the thing we cannot accept is getting comfortable, normalizing this situation. And from my perspective, the playing of the videos decreases the risk of that happening. And I hope that we will never have to play another video. I hope they're all home by the time you and I are finished talking.
Please
but as
God.
long as they're there, and as long as these horrific videos are released, I think that it's all of our responsibility to see them and to be reminded what we're trying to do.
And before we wrap here, and I resisted reaching out to you for a very long time out of sensitivity for your family and honestly not really knowing what was in your best interest and what you wanted to do truly. How has it been dealing with everything extremely publicly and giving interviews even months after Hirsh was murdered and traveling and speaking? Is that something that you find is truly therapeutic, or is it something that you're doing for the sense of the hostages and you're willing to kind of endure personal pain for the sake of freeing those who are still in captivity?
So we talked a little bit at the beginning about the utterly abnormal time that we are all living in. Tens of thousands of people showed up at Hirsch's funeral. Tens of thousands of people came through the Shiva. And on the one hand, it's heartwarming that many people care. And by the way, I know from the families of Carmel and Eden and Almog and Alex and Ori that their families had the same thing. So there's something happening where the people of Israel, people around the world, feel the need to show their support. It's a good thing. On the other hand, we are all dealing with very private, personal tragedy. And we try to carve out our space to do that. We try to be very guarded of our private apartment, to be very protective of our time. That's all a balance. And as I said, just the reality around us of knowing that there are still hostages that need to be saved keeps us from probably dealing with our grief and our tragedy the way we psychologically should. I hope that we will get through the current situation, bring it to some level of closure, whatever that means, as soon as possible, and allow every family of every hostage, every returned hostage, every family of the soldiers to do the psychological and physical healing that we all need. It's going to be a process. It's going to be a process. And even though we're 7 months in our case, I oftentimes feel like we've barely started it. We've barely faced it. Luckily, if I could use that word, our religion, Judaism, has some things that kind of force it upon us. The whole Shiva process, the Shloshim, the saying of Kaddish, the year of mourning, of Avelut. But we're in such an abnormal situation that in many ways, all of us, are writing the book on how to go through personal trauma, personal tragedy in the context of a broader public trauma and tragedy on a global basis. I think all of us will have something, for good or for bad, to teach the world. Meantime, we're just going to keep on going.
Hashem should continue to provide comfort and provide your family the space to heal privately. And God willing, the hostages are returned immediately. So, like you said, there's some sort of finality, at least to this chapter, and you're able to have that space to heal privately and not feel that there's other families you have to help with. I really hope that happens very, very quickly.
Amen. Thank you. It's what we all need to be working for, striving towards. Thank you for inviting me, for continuing to tell the story of everything that's going on. It's so important. Please don't stop. I will make one little plug here, which is Sunday night, April 27th, 8 p.m. here in Jerusalem, in Kikar Safra. The 6 families whose loved ones were murdered together in Gaza in late August are all coming together, and we are hosting an evening of everybody being together, no politics, just being together in song and prayer and hope. And we invite the whole country. In many ways, we 6 families are a microcosm of the people of Israel. We represent secular to religious to ultra-Orthodox, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, city people, kibbutz people, and on and on and on. And we've come together as 6 families in tragedy and come together, all gotten to love each other. We strengthen each other. We meet up periodically. And we feel like if we 6 families can do that, maybe we can be some small part of bringing together all of the people of Israel to do that. And so,
Amen. And everyone should learn from your lessons. So on April 27th, hope everyone can come by and be there.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks.
Thank you to all the listeners.
Appreciate it.